Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be splitting my time with the member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge. I'm actually very torn to even be speaking today, Mr. Speaker. As most of the members know in the House, I spent 25 years in the military. And I'm actually speaking here from a level of disappointment. I'm not going to attack the minister's record of service. In fact, I respect his record of service, both as a military or as a police officer in British Columbia and as a reservist within our Canadian Armed Forces. He's done 3 tours in Afghanistan. I actually, when I look around, if I have to go back on military operations ever in the future, I would actually trust him to be beside me. There's a lot of talk here about politicians and about, civilian oversight, which nobody in the military will ever, disagree with. We need that. We live in a democracy. However, for those that, hate to burst the bubble of some of my colleagues, but the rank and file of the military don't really care about us too much here in this House of Parliament. They respect what we do, but they serve the country. They're not serving us. They serve all Canadians. I'll quote one of them from following along as they follow some of this unfortunate situations with the sexual misconduct allegations and where the state of the Department of National Defence and the military is right now. And it just drives them home. They think that they're political pawns for the government and that all decisions are being made based on keeping votes, vice what is right. So what I'm going to speak today for the rest of my speech, Mr. Speaker, is really about leadership and accountability of this minister, or lack thereof, since he's become the Minister of National Defence. In times of crisis, militaries rely on leaders to provide focus on the priorities that matter. They bring energy, determination, and demand standards are met. Mr. Speaker, in a democracy, militaries are led by elected officials who must set the tone, give direction, and follow up on that direction. None of this has happened in the last 3 years in particular. Platitudes and invasion of accountability are the exact opposite of what is expected, indeed, what is demanded. Leaders not only lead, they must be seen to lead. They seek and accept accountability in themselves and others. Canadians expect more. Canadian Armed Forces members need more. The solution is not to express surprise and disgust, but actually provide detailed, specific expectations and the path to meet those expectations and the consequences when those expectations are not met. Accountability starts and stops with the Minister of National Defence. I'm just going to focus on the 3 of the sexual misconduct allegations currently ongoing within the Canadian Armed Forces. Well, let's talk about the former Chief of Defence Staff, General Vance, going back to 2018. The minister has used the excuse. In fact, I've discussed this with the minister in the past about my own frustration and disappointment in the current Prime Minister for his interference in the independence of our judiciary and our prosecution system tied to the SNC-Lavalin affair. But in this case, the minister says it's not up to politicians to interfere in an investigation. I will totally agree. However, as the Minister of National Defence, the CDS and the Ombudsman report to the Minister of National Defence. He is their chain of command. He is clearly accountable for the performance of the Chief of Defence Staff and is the steward of the Canadian Armed Forces. So when he was duly informed of a potential breach of op honour and allegation of sexual misconduct by the Chief of Defence Staff, the minister failed to take appropriate action. He could have initiated an investigation, or at least ensured one was initiated by the appropriate authorities. However, once he was made aware of that breach, he actually became complicit in allowing this breach to continue by not taking that appropriate action. Had he still been a serving member within the Canadian Armed Forces, he could have been held accountable for failing to act. The minister knows this and knows that it is only the honourable thing to step down. Further, as a former police officer, he knows that initiating an investigation or demanding one being conducted is not tantamount to interference. Interference with an investigation can only occur if one has been initiated. The minister, as a former police officer, cannot argue he was unaware of that fact. Next, let's talk about Admiral MacDonald. During testimony to the Defense Committee, Lieutenant Commander Trotter talked about how he attempted to report the allegations against Admiral MacDonald. He was eventually placed in contact with the Chief of Staff to the Department Assistant, an office that reports or supports the Minister of National Defence, but reports directly to the Deputy Minister. These D&D staff mishandled this complaint, initially suggesting that Lieutenant Commander Trotter report the incident to the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, which has no mandate to handle sexual misconduct complaints. Trotter was then referred to the Canadian Forces National Investigation Services, but only after the military police liaison officer to the SMRC was brought into the discussion. This incident just further reinforces my point that even now, 3 years after he was first made aware of allegations and shortfalls within the department, that under this minister's lack of leadership, the department still is incapable of properly handling a sexual misconduct complaint when it involves the higher ranks. And this is clear evidence of sustained and systematic failure within the department. Next, and more recently, we have General Fortin. I'm not going to get into the details because the only information I have available is what's been made available in the public. But however, what's been reported in the media suggests that D&D and the Canadian Armed Forces is not even following their own policies as involved with General Fortin. He was directed to step aside and take leave when he was accused of historical allegations and misconduct. However, from the media reporting, General Fortin is now attempting to deal with this in court because the department and the military failed to follow the removal from command process that was established in the 1990s, late 90s, early 2000s. This is a mess, and based on the public information available from General Fortin's lawyer, it's even been suggested the senior Liberal leaders are directly engaged in these decisions affecting the employment of Canadian Armed Forces senior leadership. So in the first two examples, Mr. Speaker, we have an example where the minister is refusing to take action, or under the auspices of not interfering, yet in the final example, we have it where they're not following the proper processes and actually interfering in a potential sexual misconduct allegation. So finally, I'd like to conclude with some feedback and commentary that I've been receiving from the rank and file and recently retired members of the Canadian Armed Forces about their opinion about the current government and the lack of leadership with the minister. Quote, "I had no intention in framing or hanging my certificate of service because it has the current Prime Minister's name on it. And I think it might make a very good fire starter." When I talk to victims, people I know that have even testified at committee about sexual misconduct allegations, and I ask them about what do they think about the Liberal filibustering going on at the Defense Committee, the one word they use, brutal. And from a former senior military officer, this Minister of National Defence enjoys no confidence from any part of either the department or the Canadian Armed Forces due to his lack of leadership. As such, Mr. Speaker, this is why, unfortunately, we had to move this motion today, calling for the minister to be censored. As my regimental slogan goes, never pass a fault. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? We'll first go to the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin, I want to thank my friend and honourable colleague for his years of honourable service. I know that he's got lots of experience and a tremendous amount of insight into the military, and I know that he represented our nation honorably. And I also want to thank him for not joining the apparent chorus and the pile-on effect in attacking the Minister of Defence and his record. I've been disappointed in this House over the last couple of weeks, and some of the personal attacks, which I think are very, very unwarranted. Given the degree of experience with which my friend has across the floor, and his background and his service, I think it's not impossible to imagine a universe where the Conservatives form government and he becomes the Minister of Defence. Honestly, by the same token, the current leader of the Conservative Party was indeed the Minister of Defence when this came to light in 2015. So I'd like to ask my friend across the floor there, if he was the Minister of Defence, how would he have dealt with this differently, and why would that achieve a different outcome?
Member for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague across the way for his question. I will correct him. The leader of the official opposition was not the Minister of National Defence at the time of the previous incident. He was the Minister of Veterans Affairs. So he wasn't the one accountable or directly responsible. In fact, he took the appropriate action by reporting an allegation or a rumor that he heard into the appropriate authorities, which was then investigated by the Canadian Forces National Investigation Services, where they, obviously, based on the information they made available, it didn't maybe highlight the shortfalls with the previous Chief of Defence Staff. As for answering his hypothetical, if I had been the Minister of National Defence at the time when the allegations and the former ombudsman brought that allegation forward, I wouldn't have hesitated to look at it, make a determination to get an investigation started under the prior, and then stayed out of it. Once you've initiated that and you ensure that it's done, then you need to turn it over to the proper authorities, but you can't turn your back. He, as the Minister of National Defence, the CDS reports to you.
Questions and comments? Commentaires?
The Honourable.
Si, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been listening to the debate, and we're living in a sad time for women right now. In Quebec, every day, there is a woman who's a victim of conjugal violence who is looking for resources and can't find them because we don't have enough of them. I imagine it's the same thing throughout all of Canada. When we talk strictly about sexual misconduct, according to Quebec's Association of Victim Support Groups, only 5% of these types of assaults are reported to police. So basically never. When they do make it to trial, only 3 out of 1,000 complaints gets a conviction. We've been watching the sad spectacle of a government trying to hide sexual misconduct that's been documented. The Prime Minister, the Chief of the Defence Staff, the Minister of Defence, and we have a report from 6 years ago where they were recommending setting up an independent office. Is it not a shame? Is this spectacle not a sad message to be sending to women of this country? The Honourable Member for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Merci pour son discours.
Thank you for his speech.
It is. It's really sad. When we had the Take Note debate a while back on gendered violence that was based on the unfortunate tragic killings in Quebec, I spoke up then and talked about the needing for more resources, but specifically here within the Canadian Armed Forces. And that report, when that report came out, I was still in uniform, the first report from Madame Deschamps, and I was shocked. In fact, I'll even admit, I almost didn't believe it until I started talking to a number of my female colleagues that are still serving, and they started telling me stories. And I got so disgusted and mad. I almost got mad at them because it was like, because I obviously failed, because they didn't feel that they could have used me as a colleague, as a peer, we were lieutenant colonels at the time, to come forward and tell me what was going on by behavior of some general officers. Because, and that's on me, that's on every senior officer, male and female, within the Canadian Armed Forces that are allowing this to perpetuate and not fix it. But yes, the independence is required. Everybody needs to step up, and it's why I go back to my comment about the failure of accountability and leadership by the minister. When something gets reported, you got to do the right thing.
We've run out of time for that round of questions and comments.